And I think one of the things would be some phrasing that I would use would be unfunded mandate. And this is a pretty giant change. Welcome to the EMS Wizard podcast. I am your host, Terrence Sheehy. Where's
I thought it
John?
was Big Papa.
It is. It is, but I don't.
I think we're running a little slim on staffing. I think we're a little short staffed for this episode.
Walter's not with us.
Walter, who is not with us, and only God knows where John is this day.
Correct. I don't want
Been
to
gone everywhere.
Be responsible, but we've got a brighter flower instead of those dull mulberries. Kathia, it's so good to see you again.
I thought you were talking about Mark.
Well, earlier I was, but don't
No
call
longer.
me out like that. Yeah. now that we're gone live.
So our new co-host or co-guest depends on which category you fall into. If you're on the Wizard podcast or if you're on the John and Terry podcast.
It's a recurring guest.
Maybe reoccurring. Who knows? This is the Terry show tonight.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, it's a Terry show, and then with two guests.
In homage to John not being with us, I've got Robin back there, just like I'm normally his Robin. But I just wanted to channel that for John tonight.
Missing John.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm missing him, but whatever.
So I think we have probably a long conversation coming up here with this particular episode, because there's been a lot of, I will say, chatter. If I'm not going to call it chatter, I'm going to say there's been a lot of emails and difficult conversations with this whole OSHA change. And we hear about OSHA or OSHA, however, you want to pronounce it from whatever part of the state you're in, because some people say OSHA, some people say OSHA.
In the Northeast part, we say Kathia is probably midway between you and I, though. So how do you say it?
OSHA.
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 I've never heard it called OSHA.
Really? I've heard it both ways.
OSHA, yes.
So this federal regulatory authority, or we're going to call it, I guess, has come up with some pretty substantial changes. And I think some of these substantial changes is coming with this large monetary challenge that a lot of fire and EMS agencies alike are going to, kind of have to deal with if all this goes through. So I think maybe let's start off the conversation just kind of talking about how this federal regulatory authority known as OSHA from Kathia's corner of the coast there,
she's with us.
How that affects EMS.
Money.
Yeah, definitely.
I think in our brief conversation before we started recording this episode, I think that dollar figure, and in some of the meetings, whether it's on the phone with some of our friends or in teaching an officer class a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this. And I think one of the things would be some phrasing that I would use would be unfunded mandate. And this is a pretty giant change, Mark. We were talking about this before we started here, and the current fire brigade change, and that's the standard that OSHA. You almost got me to say OSHA. That OSHA is changing. That fire brigade change is it's 41 years old, 1983. So it's older than you. It's probably older than Kathia too. So
it is.
It made me feel
just
old.
a couple years. Just a couple years.
Oh my gosh. So some of us were around, not like I wasn't doing anything then. Still learning to ride a bike probably. Well, that would have been age 12, but I digress. So finally updating these standards, and during the COVID health emergency, we saw a lot of temporary standards and a lot of temporary guidelines, but I'm going to zero in on one standard change with this. And so there's a whole bunch of things, but one of them would be a medical and fitness evaluation. So two pieces that I would look at this and say, okay, before I get hired by my agency, they are going to do a pre-employment physical for me. And so they're going to draw blood, they're going to do 12 lead EKG, and just looking for a whole bunch of things. And depending on your contractor or whatever, the state had sent out some paperwork in the last couple of weeks, and they were pricing that between $450 and $550 per employee. So if I'm a 10 employee agency, where am I coming up with that ballpark five grand? If I'm 100-person agency, where am I coming up with that 50 grand? And that's just not just pre-employment physical, but I've got to do these physicals every year. And so that's one big piece. But another piece that I really, really want to talk about is physical agilities. And so I took the liberty of pulling up one county in the western part of the state. They shall remain nameless, and look at their physical agility. And they've got a whole thing with carrying equipment and going up and down steps. They've got this dumbbell curl that you do, getting in and out of the ambulance, doing CPR for a certain amount of time. And we talk about it sometimes when we do the officer class, because we've got some pictures of that. The agency's previous director, he is now assistant county manager, out doing that as a physician, doing that physical agility. And so what I would say is, how many agencies across the state of North Carolina, if we look at the hundred counties plus the tribe, and depending on your county, it's either one agency or it's 13 agencies. So okay, how am I doing a physical agility for my agency? How am I doing those physicals? And that's, to me, that's the tip of the iceberg. But when we look at, and this has been a conversation, that a piece that I've had for years, when we look at our brothers and sisters in law enforcement and in fire, that they've been doing that for a long time. That's nothing new to them. So I've talked for a minute. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I know for us, well, for me in general, I wondered coming into EMS why we don't have agility tests. And this was 9 years ago. I mean, a lot of us are overweight, unhealthy. We've got bad knees, bad backs from manual stretchers. And now that we have automatic stretchers, I feel like a lot of us have become unfit in the EMS world. So, for me, how does that affect staffing? That's half, right now we're talking about probably half my staff would not meet an agility test if we had to do that right now. And then,
This
like
might
you
be a
said,
fun episode.
where does that money come from? We are that 10-person agency you were talking about.
Definitely. It looks like Mark's mic has quit working. These are always my
Has it
favorite
really?
episodes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, it really has. You thought he was flabbergasted there for a moment, but it's just, yeah, I can see his lips moving, but he's making no noise. And I think that that's tribute to how shocking these changes are to him. That how do we make this change? And it's funny because the only thing that we hate more than what we're currently doing is change. And it's kind of a joke sometimes in EMS, is the only thing I hate more than the current way. And Kathia, I think you're right that the equipment that we have, whether it's the power lift, power load, years ago we would have to do stretching. I remember the Association of County Commissioners.
Calisthenics.
Yep, yep. They had some folks coming around because of workman's comp claims.
Mhm.
That if you had a high workman's claim amount, they would show up at your agency and they would show you some stretching. You'd be doing the tennis ball, the trigger point stuff, using the back of your truck. And now we have this technology which has made us, it's made us, you're right, fatter and lazier. Maybe it's just I found barbecue.
Well, I mean, barbecue is life,
It's like
at
Heavy
least the
D.
right kind.
Like Heavy D says,
Can you hear me?
now
Yeah.
that we found love, what are we gonna do? No, the gentleman is back with
Oh,
us.
well,
Look at
The
that.
only reason this has happened is because Kathia said something about it like an hour ago, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, it
I
happened that one
did.
time in the middle of the episode," and then like 10 or 12 episodes later,
I thought
it
she just had
randomly
you
happens again.
speechless.
I mean,
But
it's a heavy topic. I can understand why you're speechless right now.
so yeah, it is a very heavy topic, and I think it's so the thing that I feel like, for the purpose of growth and for the overall, purpose for an agency, and I don't know where you guys went while I was out trying to fix my freaking microphone. But if we're talking about the whole, physical agility test and all that still, uh, yeah, we definitely need to be doing that. I mean, for the profession overall and for our safety of our personnel, we need to be doing that. But again, while it's a great idea, and I'm sure the guys on this panel from OSHA that put all this stuff together, yeah, it's a great idea, and I agree with a lot of the things that's in there. But it's the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's capable of, and they're creating things that some agencies aren't going to be able to implement. They're pushing a lot of these rules out, but I think there is a need for a lot of these things to at least. I hope if nothing else comes out of this whole debacle is that maybe some of this stuff's been brought to light for people to say, well, we probably need to be doing physical agility tests or some sort of assessment and reoccurring assessment of our employees' physical ability. I can think back to my days on the volunteer fire department where we really didn't have any physical requirements. It's all 100% volunteer. We're not going to turn anybody away. We got a job for everybody, right? We'll take the help that we can get. If you can just go get the cooler and fill it full of ice and bottled water, bring it to the scene, we got a job for you,
Doing a good
right?
job.
But at the same time, how long or how many times have we seen someone that comes into a profession and then suddenly, those headaches that somebody's had for 2 or 3 years is actually undiagnosed hypertension? Well, if we had just done something simple as checking vital signs upon hire, hey, your blood pressure is kind of high. Is this normal? You know, we in other instances we've seen where we've actually diagnosed medical conditions just from some assessments and physical agility tests and assessment centers and things of that nature. So, I mean, I think that's something that being proactive, again, instead of reactive, in a lot of things like we typically do in emergency services, we wait until we see how much money it's cost us, then let's react to it. Let's be proactive and probably let's focus on the main points of this regulatory change and what can we start implementing now.
Well, I mean, does this
I would
open the
I
door
would joke.
for you have a joke?
No, go ahead, ladies
Oh, I was
first.
going to say, well, does that open the door for county-based agencies to be equally funded amongst PD and fire if the structure is the same for
Oh,
them? Because
Mm.
where are we going to get the money from? We're already stretched thin as an EMS
I,
agency all across the board. So does that
I
open the
think that's
door
a
for
whole
that?
nother area. And I think
Mm.
the word that I have heard some toss around is parity. Does that mean that I have a cancer presumption because of the stresses in the job or exposure to whether it's carcinogens or some of the other things that we're out there being exposed to? Is that law enforcement with their 25-year retirement and the law enforcement supplement? I think a lot of those things, which North Carolina doesn't do, but there are other states. Texas does some of that, I believe, and I know that there are some northern states that do those types of things. I think it does open that parity question up for us.
Mm-hmm. What was your joke?
So my joke, it's not really a joke, it's a funny story, and it is in the words of the gentleman, it's a tale as old as EMS itself. And so talking with a supervisor one time at another agency, and they had we were talking about this type of thing, how in our part-time jobs at the time, I was working for a town and as a firefighter, and as part of that fire department, I had to do a yearly physical agility, and I had to do a physical as part of my employment with the town. And we're talking about how some folks had found things in that physical agility. Hey, your A1C is creeping up, and talking about that, there was a female paramedic who had gotten pregnant, and she didn't think she was pregnant, but sure enough she was, and that's a whole story unto itself. But when she went to the OB, they had said, well, your blood sugar is, it was something obscene like 400, and she had been hadn't seen a doctor in years since the birth of her last child, which was 8 or 9, I think, at that time. And so over that time, she had developed insulin resistant, and her sugar had crept up. And so when they were trying to control her sugar, if her sugar hit that normal range, that 90 to 120, she would be lightheaded. She would feel like she was about to pass out. And for her, normal was like, I think 250 is what I was told. And so, right, we know how bad and how unhealthy that is. But that simple nature of having that physical agility and catching those issues, because we know what happens when you have that uncontrolled diabetes and then you have some sort of workman's comp injury, whether it's a wound or something else, how that delays our healing process.
I mean, there's just a lot of deep-rooted topics within these regulations. These two, as far as like finances and the medical part of it, is just the very tippy top of it.
And I think it's probably something that needs to be at the top, right? I think that probably needs to be a primary focus, to kind of hate to kind of beat a dead horse here, but we hear the horror stories all the time of, where we have a line of duty death kind of situation. And more oftentimes than not, we've heard the story so many times. It's the after fire training, after they got home that night, or, it was at the station and just didn't, wasn't on the call, wasn't actually doing anything. And, we have to take some ownership of that. I think we have to face the reality of it. And I think we have to take some ownership of that and figure out what it is that we can do about it. There's, get creative with some of the ideas. I can think back years ago, or a previous training officer at the county I worked at. He had started a wellness program kind of internally, and there was like this little weight loss competition where he had a set of scales up at the main base, and there's a little sign up sheet, and whoever, everybody pitched in, $5, $10,
That
whatever it
is a
was.
state secret. We do not talk about my weight. Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's all part of the competition, though, and it's not necessarily about how much you actually weigh, but how much you actually lost. So the goal was to have the most weight loss out of the whole thing, right? So some people probably weren't going to lose a whole lot because they might not have weighed a lot to begin with, but the most weight loss was the biggest, achievement.
All the guys won. Guys lose weight like this. Like,
Oh yeah, let me cut out Pepsi for just 1 week.
right.
Done.
I could eat a peanut a day and lose a pound, where you guys are like, oh, just quit drinking Pepsi and I'm good.
Terry, why are
Yes.
you confused?
Terry's confused. He's confused because that doesn't work that way for him.
So let's talk about one last thing. There's a whole bunch of details when we talk about these OSHA changes,
Mm.
with a number OSHA changes, hazard vulnerability assessments, response agreements. There's some updated PPE standards. Oh, and so making sure that we've got better protection, emergency response plans, hazard coverage, and just increasing the scope. But one of the things I want to take a couple minutes and chat about as we start to wind our way down is behavioral health resources. And when we look at this, one of the things in this news release from a law firm providing behavioral health and wellness resources or identifying where these are available at, this is my favorite part, no cost to the responder.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another way that I use a bold term. I think that's another way that we fail. I'm taking a second to see because the North Carolina, whoever runs Highway Patrol, what are they? Not emergency management, public safety.
DPS, yeah.
Yep, DPS has got some stuff for responder assistance initiative where they don't just the services are no cost to Department of Public Safety employees, spouses, and dependents by professionally trained peers, licensed mental health providers, wellness coordinators, and so again, law enforcement is doing it. They've got some pretty awesome stuff that public safety is doing. The Highway Patrol is leading the way in North Carolina, but what do we talk about this? And there was a number that I saw on social media of all places about the average person is exposed to 3 traumatic events during their life. So maybe that's being there when a loved one passes away or whatever, but EMS providers are exposed to 175 traumatic events during their career. And it's a passionate subject of mine. I don't have the answer when I say it, but we suck at this. And so, the federal government forcing it and forcing it to happen.
I mean, it's something that isn't a topic when you're going through school or any kind of education. It's not a big continuing education topic either, um, at all. And I think that's a discussion I have actually with my wife quite a bit is they don't teach you the mental impact
No,
and the
they don't.
emotional impact that this field brings. And
Correct.
it never affected me until I came off the truck after my injury because you're constantly running that next call. Constantly, you're moving on to the next one. So you're pushing that call back. And that's when I started going, that's not in the textbook. That's not in the book. We weren't taught this. It's almost like your parents trying to avoid a conversation that needs to be had. You should have it before you move out and move on to your bigger and better life. But we don't have that when we're bringing new people in. And the people we're bringing in are younger and younger. They're not in their early 30s like I was. They're in their high school. We're trying to get EMTs from high school age. And this is not a topic. And I really think it should be more of a topic if we're going to be bringing in 18-year-olds because that number of 175 traumatic events is going to be higher for them.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say is, where that number might be 175 for Terry and myself, but for someone that started right out the gate in high school, coming out of, these high school EMT programs, their number's probably going to be much higher,
Mm-hmm.
no matter where they go. And we have, mental health, I think, is improved a lot for EMS as far as our recognition of it. I feel like that has improved, and then the resources that's available has improved, but we're nowhere anywhere near close where we need to be.
We've taken big strides in the last 9 years, but I agree with you on that.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's been a lot of pride that's been swallowed and said, okay, it's okay not to be okay. So yeah, I think there's there's several topics that can come out of this whole, the OSHA comments guide that was sent out. I will say that there are not many documents I've ever seen that exist with all of these disciplines all in one joint statement between the North Carolina State Fire Association, the Office of State Fire Marshal, North Carolina Association of Rescue and EMS, the North Carolina Association of Fire Chiefs, and the North Carolina Office of EMS all coming together and saying, hey, this is a concern for our responders in the state. And I would highly encourage if there's a email that come out from Continuum. So all you guys in North Carolina, you got an email somewhere from Continuum. Go in there, read through that email. And if you haven't researched this information as a EMS administrator, rescue squad chief, what have you, read this information because this is going to affect everybody to some degree. And I think the more people we have that's sending out these letters and contacting during this whole open comment session, we need to be doing it because it's going to have a huge impact. Now, I'm not saying that these things that's in this list, again, I agree, a lot of these things need to be implemented, but I think we need to go about it a better way.
I think this is that EMS officer life, and these external things affect us in our jobs, and this you can't manage by being an ostrich, burying your head in the sand and not paying attention to the things that are happening. And right now, this is the time, whether you work for a board of directors, a board of commissioners, whoever you work for, this is the time to have that conversation to say, hey, one of these changes in that spreadsheet talks about apparatus that are older than 15 years. So I know there's some NFPA standards that talk about vehicle replacement for fire trucks, but this is a whole nother change with stuff, and I keep coming back to that phraseology of unfunded mandate. Kathia, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
No, but this is an exciting topic right here because there's just so much you can dive into.
We could talk about this for another 5 hours, and I would
We
enjoy it,
definitely
and
could.
you would want your ears to bleed. Final question, though, Kathia, before
Yes,
we leave.
Don't fall into it. It's a trap.
it's always a trap.
It's a trap.
You're going to be a recurring character. Is that what we call it? And
A character?
has your best friend changed, or is it still?
My best friend.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
I don't
would have
know.
talked
You
about
guys,
this a couple
you
months
guys have
ago.
definitely popped up a lot more in my life. So I don't know. I might be rearranging my top five.
Oh,
Who's your
Mm.
second best friend?
she only counts to 5 on her best friends list.
Well, yeah, because I'm the
Who's your?
MySpace generation. So it's like top
I think
five.
it was 8 there, but okay.
Is there
So
eight on
who's your
MySpace?
second best? It was
Mm.
8 out of MySpace, the original.
No,
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say Mark Casey's my second right now.
Stupid. This is the worst episode ever.
haters
Oh
gonna hate.
gosh, you're so dramatic. I already said it was the Terry show today.
Oh yeah, okay. All right.
I did, but you can't have it all. I mean, well, I guess you
In the
could,
words of
but no.
Sharpay, I want it all.
I mean, I guess my wife always says, "What's cake for if you can't eat it?" So